All right, guys. You know the routine. I'm going to play a video. I don't know whether I'll chime in at the end or if I'll break it up periodically. We'll see as I go.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Open Question. There's a strange idea that has quietly existed in the background of modern thought, something that many people have felt but never said out loud. The idea that religion might not just be outdated or misguided, but something much deeper. Something closer to a collective psychological malfunction. A socially accepted delusion that spreads from one generation to another like a virus of the mind. It's not just about whether gods exist or not. That's already been debated endlessly. The real question is what kind of mental state it requires to believe in things without evidence, to build your identity on stories that crumble under scrutiny, and to live your life guided by fear, guilt, and invisible authority. These are the same traits we see in individuals who are considered mentally unwell. Yet when these patterns are wrapped in ritual, tradition, and community, they are not only tolerated, they're celebrated. One of the clearest markers of delusion is when someone holds a belief so strongly that it shapes their entire reality, even if that belief has no basis in evidence. When a person claims to hear voices, talk to unseen entities, or believe the world will end because of supernatural prophecy, we normally classify that as a psychological condition. But when the same claims are made in a religious setting,
Celebrate Zaxby's birthday with half-off handcrafted milkshakes.
Who's got the sauce?
Zaxby's.
they're treated as sacred. Why does the context make it acceptable? There are documented cases of people who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia or psychotic disorders because they believe they're chosen by a divine power. But if they reframe that same belief through the lens of religion, suddenly it's not seen as a symptom, it's seen as spirituality. That shift should make us pause. Because it means we're not evaluating beliefs based on truth or evidence, we're evaluating them based on social approval. Religion normalizes magical thinking. It trains the mind to abandon reason in favor of faith. And that's where the parallel to mental illness becomes hard to ignore. In most areas of life, believing without evidence is seen as a flaw. If someone believes their neighbor is a demon and refuses to interact with them, we'd call that a serious psychological problem. But if someone believes non-believers are going to burn forever and still teaches this to children, it's called moral education. That brings up another critical point: indoctrination. Children are especially vulnerable. When a young brain is still developing, being told that unseen forces are watching, judging, and punishing their thoughts can lead to lifelong anxiety. Many adults who grew up religious report chronic guilt, fear of abandonment, and obsessive thoughts, even after leaving the faith. These aren't just philosophical scars. These are psychological injuries. In fact, there's a growing field of study called religious trauma syndrome. It shares characteristics with PTSD. People suffer from nightmares.
Kind of curious about this, so I'm going to take a look real quick. Religious trauma syndrome describes the negative mental health effects of harmful religious experiences such as abuse, manipulation, or indoctrination. It can manifest in various ways, including emotional, cognitive, and behavioral symptoms, and may also affect relationships and self-esteem. While similar to other trauma-related disorders, RTS can be particularly challenging due to the religious context and the potential for intense guilt, shame, and fear. Signs and symptoms: emotional, anxiety, panic attacks, depression, guilt, shame, fear, anger, and grief. Cognitive, difficulty with decision making, critical thinking, and identity confusion. Behavioral, avoidance of religious settings, difficulty setting boundaries, and hypervigilance in avoiding perceived moral failings. Just skimming real quick. Relationship difficulties, impact on self-esteem and identity, social and cultural challenges, developmental delays, similarity to PTSD, treatment, need for support, potential for healing. Might have to dig into that later. Anyway, I shouldn't have even stopped. That was my own personal
panic
curiosity.
attacks, and emotional numbness because of what they were taught to believe. These effects don't come from just bad experiences with individuals. They come from internalizing an entire system of thought that suppresses doubt, demands obedience, and punishes critical thinking. If a person was isolated, told their thoughts are sinful, told the world is corrupt, and that they need to conform to avoid punishment, we would see that as emotional abuse. But when it's called salvation, it becomes untouchable. That's the hidden danger. Religion wraps harmful ideas in comforting language: love, peace, hope. But beneath that surface is often a rigid set of beliefs that distort how people see themselves, others, and reality itself. One study from the Journal of Religion and Health found that individuals who score high in religious fundamentalism often have lower levels of analytical thinking. That doesn't mean religious people are unintelligent, but it does suggest that when people are trained to rely on faith over logic, their ability to question and analyze weakens over time. That kind of mental conditioning mirrors what happens in cults and closed systems, where doubt is discouraged and conformity is rewarded. Even the structure of many religions mirrors obsessive-compulsive behavior. Repeating prayers a set number of times, avoiding certain foods, feeling unclean unless specific rituals are performed. There's an excessive focus on purity, control, and guilt. These patterns can overlap with symptoms seen in OCD, where repetitive thoughts and rituals are used to reduce anxiety. But instead of being treated, they're institutionalized. The concept of sin itself is psychological warfare. It creates the idea that you're inherently broken and need to constantly seek forgiveness, that you are watched, judged, and can never be fully good on your own. That kind of thinking doesn't inspire growth. It breeds helplessness. It traps people in cycles of shame and dependence. And it doesn't end in the mind. It shows up in behavior. People start avoiding certain friendships, denying themselves harmless pleasures, and policing their thoughts. All because they believe their desires are evil. That kind of suppression often leads to emotional breakdowns or explosive behavior later. Human nature doesn't disappear just because you label it sinful. In some extreme cases, people have been known to mutilate themselves, starve themselves, or live in isolation to purify their souls. That's not spiritual strength. That's self-harm justified by belief. And yet, throughout history, these actions were praised as holy. Saints who bled for faith, martyrs who gave up everything. But if someone today said they wanted to suffer to please an invisible force, most psychologists would call that delusional. It's also worth noting how religion often discourages seeking help outside the belief system. People are told to pray instead of seeing a therapist, to read scripture instead of taking medication, to trust a spiritual leader instead of a doctor. That isolation from real solutions is dangerous. Mental illness thrives in silence. And religion, at its worst, creates exactly that environment, where speaking up is seen as weakness and questioning is seen as rebellion. Even community support can become a trap. The love and acceptance people feel in religious groups often come with a condition: you must believe. If you stop believing, that same community can turn cold. People lose friends, family, even their identities. This isn't just disagreement. It's emotional blackmail. That kind of pressure causes deep mental stress. It keeps people trapped, not by chains, but by the fear of rejection. Some defenders of religion argue that it gives people comfort, that it helps them cope. But so do illusions. Just because something feels good doesn't make it true. And in many cases, the comfort is shallow. It's the kind of comfort that tells people not to think too hard, not to ask too many questions, and not to challenge authority. That's not peace of mind. That's psychological sedation. It's true that not all believers suffer mental harm, but the system itself encourages irrational thinking, emotional suppression, and dependency on invisible power.
You're him, the one they call the Baba Yaga.
The John Wick franchise.
And when you zoom out and look at the traits, delusions, paranoia, compulsive behavior, emotional instability, you start to see a pattern that's hard to ignore. Religion isn't just about belief, it's about identity. And when an identity is built on unquestionable authority, invisible punishment, and moral black and white thinking, it begins to resemble something pathological. Not in the sense that believers are sick, but in the sense that the system itself operates like a psychological condition. What's more disturbing is how society protects it. If one person believes the end of the world is near because of divine prophecy, they might be hospitalized. But if 1 million people believe it, they build a church. That's the power of numbers. Mass belief doesn't make an idea sane, it just makes it harder to challenge. And this isn't about attacking individuals, it's about recognizing that some systems, even if widespread, are not healthy. Some ideas, even if ancient, are not wise. And some traditions, even if comforting, are not safe. If we saw a friend spiraling into obsessive behavior, talking to voices, afraid to think freely, and dependent on rituals to feel clean, we'd want to help them. But when religion creates the same symptoms, we call it devotion. That's the double standard. And it's time to question it. Because if a system causes anxiety, fear, guilt, identity confusion, emotional suppression, and a disconnect from reality, we have to stop calling it sacred. We have to start calling it what it is. And maybe the real breakthrough comes when we're brave enough to say it out loud. That religion, in many ways, isn't just wrong. It's harmful. That it's not just outdated, it's psychologically dangerous. And that until we recognize that, we'll keep mistaking the symptoms for spirituality. And the illness will keep spreading. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.
It's an interesting take. The author has a lot of similar thoughts to myself. Not exactly the same, but I do tend to take, I consider all religion, all, even spirituality, if you want to go there. I think it's all psychological in nature. It can all be explained through psychology. I really think that that's the most explanatory explanation. I couldn't think of a good adjective there, so I ended up kind of using the same shit. But like, I can't think of anything else that answers questions without popping up new questions that end up just making things more and more complicated. And yeah, I'd say using Occam's razor, this is it. This is more than likely the answer. I kind of wish he had went more into, or I'm assuming it's a he, that may have, it sounded sort of like an AI voice, probably was. But I wish that they delved into defense mechanisms more. He sort of focused on the harm, and I don't disagree with him. It's not always harm, but I think that long term, it always makes someone worse off than they would have been otherwise. It's hard to see because they do gain temporary benefit, like in the present. But most like long-term harm isn't in the present, in this exact moment, in this next moment. It's like can't think of a good analogy. I want to say a domino effect, but not exactly. It's like it culminates. It gradually builds over time. And as the author said, it causes people to not use rational thinking on purpose. I mean, most religious people admitted that they use faith. If they're not completely like too far gone, they do. And essentially, if you boil it down, all that is suspension of critical thinking. That's all it is. And that is, I agree that it's dangerous, but where I was going with that is he doesn't touch upon the, well, he goes into comfort, and that is comforting. But if you're going to talk about psychology, I think that's like one of the most important things, like, because it's the fundamental driver for the belief in the first place, in my opinion, besides indoctrination. I think indoctrination is like a stepping stone. But the what I would consider a defense mechanism, the protection from the fear of death and the fear of the unknown, that stability of having your answers, for like not having to be concerned about, not nearly as much anyway, because it's all laid out for you. You have everything, like you have your, this is how you're supposed to act. You don't need to think for yourself. This is how you're ordained to act. This is the wrong way to act. And all of them, they set up a sort of reward punishment system to like further, like, this is like the, how do I put it? There's indoctrination in the sense that like generational, that like it gets passed on generation to generation, and usually it starts in like early childhood, which is a point where you're really not as capable of like complex analytical thought anyway. But then there's also indoctrination from the religion itself. It's like psychological indoctrination, to where they prey on fear and on hope and other like human emotions, and you can see in the way it gets reinforced. Like, I guess this is not a great example, because it's not as psychologically intense and deep as other religions, but like the L. Ron Hubbard, basically, I don't know the exact quote, but he stated, you want to become rich and famous or something? Create a religion. He admits, he directly like states, at least implicitly, that he made it up. It's not real. Now, it's easy to say that about Scientology because it's relatively new, and a lot of the claims are far more, I don't want to say more illogical. I think that the author's right in that it's not necessarily more illogical, it's that less people accept it. So we've created this system to where truth is, or not necessarily truth, but acceptance of validity, when it should be entirely 100% based on evidence, is based on majority rules. It's like one big appeal to the majority. So if enough people believe it, it's sacred. You're not allowed to touch it. You're not like, it's wrong to mess with it, which is, that in itself is wrong. It's how you create this like self-feeding mechanism to where like you're not allowed to question, or at least believers believe that they can't, and it keeps them stuck in this loop. And I truly see them, again, as the author stated, it's not like the people are evil. I think the system is evil, and they're victims of that system. And it's unfortunate, but like I attempt to help them, much in the same way. I'm sure they would flip this. Of course they would. They would be like, it's like when religious people think that they're trying to help me save my soul. by giving me the word of God, etc. The difference is I don't need to get people to suspend logic for my view. Like there's no need, there's no what the author would describe as mental illness involved. There's no delusions. It's simply I give a shit, and I think that this not only harms society but harms individuals, especially in the long term throughout their entire life. And some never even realize it. But anyhow, that is my thoughts on this. Feel free to chime in, whether you agree or not. It's fine. Thank you for your time.